Found out my parents left everything to my sister in their will. Not even a thank you for years of financial help. So I quietly stopped covering their bills. A month later, my dad texted me. Send $800 now. The power's about to be cut off. No greeting, no explanation. I, 32M, discovered something that changed everything between my parents and me, and honestly, I'm still processing the rage I felt that day. It started innocently enough. My dad had been having chest pains, and Mom was worried sick about the medical bills piling up. For the past 3 years, I'd been quietly covering their monthly expenses, utilities, groceries, car payments, you name it. About $800 every month, sometimes more when emergencies hit. My sister lived 2 states away with her new husband, rarely called, and contributed exactly nothing. I never made a big deal about the money. My accounting firm was doing well, I was single with no kids, and seeing my parents struggle in their retirement years just didn't sit right with me. They raised me, sacrificed for my education, so this felt like the natural order of things. The day everything unraveled was a Tuesday in March. Dad was at his cardiologist appointment, and Mom had asked me to swing by to help her organize some paperwork for their insurance claim. She seemed flustered, shuffling through documents on the kitchen table where I'd eaten countless childhood meals. Mom mentioned she couldn't find their updated will and asked if I'd help her look through Dad's filing cabinet. She seemed genuinely stressed about getting their affairs in order given his health scare. I agreed, thinking nothing of it. The filing cabinet was its usual chaotic mess. Bank statements mixed with warranty cards, tax returns scattered between recipe clippings Mom had saved for decades. I was methodically sorting through everything when I found a manila folder labeled Estate Planning, updated 2023. I probably should have just handed it over without looking, but something made me pause. Maybe it was seeing my name on some of the bank statements I'd been reviewing, all those monthly transfers I'd been making. Curiosity got the better of me. The will was comprehensive, professionally prepared, and absolutely devastating. I read it twice, then a third time, hoping I'd misunderstood something fundamental. Everything, the house, their savings, Dad's pension, Mom's jewelry, even the old Buick I'd helped them buy, was going to my sister. The house alone was worth at least $300,000. Their savings account, which I hadn't realized they still had, contained nearly $60,000. Money I'd apparently been helping them preserve while I covered their living expenses. There was a single mention of me. To our son, we leave our gratitude for his continued support and love. Gratitude. Not even a token amount. Not even Dad's tools from the garage, which he'd always promised would be mine someday. Just gratitude for being their personal ATM for 3 years. I sat in that kitchen chair for what felt like an hour, staring at those legal documents. The worst part wasn't even the money, though that stung plenty. It was the realization that my parents had been meeting with lawyers, updating their will, making these decisions while I was transferring $800 into their account every month like clockwork. They'd never once suggested I didn't need to help financially. Never mentioned they had savings. Never indicated that my sister, who called maybe twice a year and visited even less, was apparently the more valued child. I carefully put the documents back exactly where I'd found them. When Mom returned to the kitchen, I told her I couldn't locate the will she was looking for. She thanked me for trying and offered to make lunch. I declined, said I had a client meeting, and left. That night, I canceled the automatic transfer to their account. I didn't make any dramatic announcements or demand explanations. I simply stopped paying their bills. If they had savings they'd been hiding and planned to leave everything to my sister anyway, they could figure out their own finances. The first week passed without any contact. Part of me wondered if they'd even notice, given that they apparently had money tucked away. The second week, Mom called about something unrelated, a recipe she wanted to share. No mention of money or bills. By the third week, I was almost starting to feel guilty. Maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe there was some explanation I hadn't considered. Then week 4 arrived. I was reviewing quarterly reports when my phone buzzed with a text from Dad. No greeting, no small talk, just send $800 now. The power's about to be cut off. The audacity of it hit me like a physical blow. After years of treating me like their personal bank account, while secretly planning to give everything to my sister, he was demanding money with the same casual entitlement he might use to ask me to pass the salt at dinner. I stared at that message for a long time. $800. The exact amount I'd been sending monthly, like some kind of subscription service they'd grown accustomed to without ever acknowledging it was a sacrifice on my part. I typed and deleted probably 10 different responses. Part of me wanted to unload everything I'd learned, to demand answers about the will and the hidden savings account. But something held me back. Maybe it was wanting to see how far they'd push this entitlement, or maybe I just wasn't ready for that conversation yet. Instead, I responded simply, "What happened to your savings?" The reply came within minutes. "What savings? We're broke. Been living on what you send us." The lie was so brazen it actually impressed me. I'd literally seen their bank statements showing the $60,000 balance. Either they thought I was stupid, or they'd been lying about their finances for so long they'd started believing it themselves. I decided to push a little further. "Have you considered asking my sister for help?" This time the response took longer. "She's got her own family to worry about. You know she can't help right now." Right. My sister couldn't help, but she could inherit everything. That logic was fascinating. The next message arrived an hour later, this time from Mom. "Honey, we really need that money today. The electric company won't give us another extension." I almost laughed. For 3 years, I'd been their silent safety net, never asking for recognition or even a thank you. Now that I'd stopped, suddenly I was getting multiple messages and explanations about extensions and deadlines. I called my sister that evening. We hadn't spoken in months, but I was curious about her perspective on our parents' financial situation. She seemed surprised to hear from me, but quickly warmed up when I asked how she was doing. Eventually, I steered the conversation toward Mom and Dad. I mentioned that they'd been having some money troubles lately and wondered if she'd heard anything about it. Her response was enlightening. She had no idea they were struggling financially. In fact, just last month Mom had sent her a check for $500 for her birthday, and they'd mentioned possibly helping with a down payment on a bigger house for her growing family. So my parents were poor enough to need my $800 every month to keep the lights on, but wealthy enough to send my sister birthday money and offer house down payment assistance. The mathematics of that situation were remarkably creative. I thanked my sister for the chat and hung up, my suspicions confirmed. Update 1. The messages from my parents increased in frequency over the next few days. Dad's texts grew more demanding, Mom's more pleading. They wanted to know why I wasn't responding about the money. They needed it immediately. The power situation was becoming critical. I finally replied, "I'd like to sit down and talk about your finances in person. Are you free this weekend?" Dad's response, "Just send the money first. We can talk later." That pretty much told me everything I needed to know about their priorities. Instead of sending money, I drove over on Saturday morning unannounced. Both cars were in the driveway, and I could see the lights were on inside, which was interesting considering the urgent power cutoff threats. Mom answered the door looking genuinely surprised to see me. She invited me in for coffee, acting as if everything was normal between us. Dad emerged from the den where he'd apparently been watching television on their very much functioning electrical system. I asked them directly about their financial situation, how much debt they had, what their monthly expenses looked like, whether they considered other sources of help. The conversation was awkward, full of vague answers and deflections. Finally, I mentioned that I'd been helping them financially for 3 years and wanted to make sure I understood their actual needs going forward. Mom looked uncomfortable, but Dad just nodded as if this was completely expected and reasonable. That's when I asked about their savings account. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom looked at Dad, Dad looked at the floor, and I realized I'd just confirmed what I already knew. They'd been lying about being broke while sitting on $60,000 and expecting me to cover their bills. Dad eventually mumbled something about that money being for emergencies only. I asked what would constitute a bigger emergency than having their power shut off, as they claimed was happening. More uncomfortable silence. I told them I needed some time to think about things and left without making any commitments about future financial help. Update 2. The guilt trips started immediately. Mom called crying about how they didn't understand why I was being so cold to them. Dad left voicemails about family obligations and how disappointed he was in my attitude. They were treating me like some rebellious teenager rather than a grown man who'd been subsidizing their lifestyle for years. None of these emotional appeals mentioned the will, the savings account, or any acknowledgement that they'd been less than honest with me. It was all about how I was failing them in their time of need. I decided it was time for complete honesty. I called and asked them both to get on the phone together. I told them I knew about the updated will, about the savings account, about the birthday money they'd sent my sister while claiming to be broke. I explained that I'd been covering their expenses for 3 years while they secretly planned to leave everything to my sister, and I wanted to understand the logic behind that arrangement. The conversation that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced with my parents. Dad immediately became defensive, claiming they had every right to distribute their assets however they chose. Mom tried to play peacekeeper, saying they loved both their children equally even though their actions suggested otherwise. I asked why they thought it was appropriate to accept hundreds of dollars monthly from the child they planned to exclude from their will while simultaneously offering financial assistance to the child who would inherit everything. Dad's answer was brutally honest in its selfishness. My sister had children and would need the inheritance more than I would. I was successful and single, so I didn't require the same level of support. In their minds, this justified the current arrangement where I subsidized their retirement while my sister prepared to inherit the fruits of my financial assistance. The logic was staggering. Because I'd been responsible enough to build a successful business and hadn't had children yet, I was expected to pay their bills and then watch my sister inherit the money I'd helped them save. I told them this arrangement seemed fundamentally unfair and that I needed to reconsider my role in their financial planning. Mom started crying, insisting they never meant to hurt me. Dad accused me of being selfish and materialistic. Neither of them suggested changing the will or acknowledging that their setup might be ethically questionable. That conversation ended with me hanging up, more frustrated than when it began. Update 3. 2 weeks passed with minimal contact. A few text messages, one brief voicemail from Mom, but nothing like the urgent demands I'd been receiving when they thought I might send money immediately. Then my sister called, furious. She'd apparently received quite a different version of events from our parents. According to them, I discovered they were leaving me less inheritance than expected and had vindicatively stopped helping with their bills. They painted me as greedy and resentful, someone who only helped family members when there was something in it for me. My sister had bought this narrative completely and called to express her disappointment in my behavior. She couldn't believe I'd abandoned our aging parents over money and inheritance issues. I let her finish her lecture, then shared the actual timeline of events. How I'd been covering their bills for years without being asked, how I'd discovered their deception about being broke, how they'd been offering her financial assistance while claiming poverty to me. The long silence on her end was telling. I asked if she thought it was reasonable for me to continue covering their living expenses while they saved money to leave to her. Whether she'd be comfortable accepting an inheritance that had been preserved through my monthly contributions. She admitted she hadn't thought about it that way. I suggested she might want to reconsider some of the financial help they'd offered her, given that it was apparently funded by my monthly transfers. The $500 birthday check, the house down payment assistance they'd mentioned, where did she think that money was coming from? That conversation ended with her promising to talk to our parents directly about the situation. Update 4. My sister's conversation with our parents apparently went very differently than mine had. Within days, I received a call from Mom asking if we could meet to discuss everything openly and honestly. This time Dad wasn't defensive or demanding. Mom wasn't crying or deflecting. They both seemed to recognize that their approach had been unfair and unsustainable. Mom started by apologizing for not being truthful about their finances. She explained that accepting my help had become so routine they'd stopped thinking of it as a sacrifice on my part. The monthly transfers felt like normal family support rather than a significant financial contribution. Dad acknowledged that the whole situation looked bad from my perspective. He'd assumed that because I was doing well financially, I wouldn't mind helping them while my sister received the inheritance. He genuinely hadn't considered how this might feel like being taken advantage of. I appreciated their willingness to have this conversation, but I told them the damage went beyond just financial unfairness. For 3 years, they'd been comfortable lying to me about their situation while accepting my help. That broke trust in ways that went far beyond money. We spent nearly 3 hours talking through everything. Their fears about retirement finances, their assumptions about what I could afford to contribute, their reasoning behind the inheritance distribution. Much of it came down to poor communication and assumptions rather than deliberate malice, but the impact had been the same. By the end of that conversation, we'd reached some agreements. They would be completely honest about their finances going forward. No more claims of poverty while sitting on savings. No more automatic expectations of monthly support without discussion. Regarding the will, they agreed to reconsider the distribution. Not necessarily equal splits, but something that acknowledged my years of financial contribution rather than treating my sister as the sole heir. Most importantly, they would start managing their own bills immediately instead of expecting me to continue the monthly transfers indefinitely. The relationship is still healing. Trust doesn't rebuild overnight after being broken for years. But at least now we're operating from a foundation of honesty rather than the elaborate fiction they'd maintained about their financial situation. My sister has been surprisingly supportive throughout this process. She's offered to decline any inheritance adjustments in my favor, saying she never expected or needed their money anyway. I appreciated the gesture, but told her the issue was never really about the inheritance amounts. It was about honesty and recognition of contributions. Looking back, I probably should have addressed this situation years ago instead of quietly enabling their deception. But sometimes it takes a crisis to force conversations that should have happened long before. At least now we all understand where we stand with each other, financially and otherwise. The monthly transfers have stopped permanently. My parents are managing their own expenses with their savings and Social Security, which it turns out they could have been doing all along. Sometimes they ask for help with specific unexpected expenses, and sometimes I say yes, but it's now a conscious choice rather than an automatic expectation. It's a much healthier dynamic for everyone involved.